Creatures of terror, werewolves, hunting under a full moon. What we see in horror films is actually based on true events.
Perhaps this animal was man-made.
Scientists uncover the secret behind werewolves.
A wolf can't snap a spine in one bite.
Court files dating back centuries describe mysterious creatures.
Long ago, witches, demons, and werewolves were very, very real.
And today, do werewolves exist?
To be honest, I just scared the living daylights on me.
An animal out of control or a creature from hell?
The concept that there is something out there which can kill us is a deep-seated fear within us.
When did the werewolf myth emerge? The great myths of mankind. Mysteries passed on over thousands of years. Inexplicable events, places shrouded in legend, and superhuman heroes. Even scientists are fascinated. Is there any truth to these ancient legends? Researchers across the globe are working hard to solve the greatest mysteries of our time. France, summer of 1764. On June the 30th of that year, the region around Saint-Étienne-de-Ludgard is struck by one of the most frightening killing sprees in history. The first victim is 14-year-old Jeanne Bollet. She watches over her family's herd of cattle. But that day, something gets in her way. The girl doesn't stand a chance. Her death is just the beginning. An eerie creature prowls the woods of Vaudan. It seems to target specific victims, women and children. By the end of August 1764, 7 people had been killed. The authorities called the blood-hungry killer the Beast of Gévaudan, a creature nobody has ever seen before. To this very day, people in Gévaudan, a region between Auvergne and Languedoc, are still put off by what happened in the 18th century. A statue in the area has been dedicated to the fight against the beast.
My grandmother told me this story when I was a child, and of course, it scared me.
Bernard Soulier is a writer and an expert in local history. Nobody knows the documents detailing the beast better than him. He believes what happened here was more than a typical animal attack.
2 things about this story are extraordinary. First, there were so many attacks on human beings. And second, nobody described the animal as a wolf.
Another unusual fact, some of the victims are naked, and some have been beheaded. The locals launch a hunt for the phantom in the forest of Gévaudan. But what the men mainly end up shooting are wolves. King Louis XV sends a dragoon unit to support the hunters and dispel the rising panic. But the only thing they end up with are more dead wolves. Meanwhile, the murders continue. And again, the only victims are children and women. People back then were also wondering who or what is this beast. Bernard Soulier finds an unsettling answer tucked away in a book.
People just didn't know what they were dealing with. Nobody was certain. Some people thought this animal was a werewolf.
The usual explanatory patterns for wild animal attacks didn't really work for the vaudan beast. Certainly some of the injuries could be explained away by wild animals, but not all of them. Why were some of the victims undressed? Why had they been unable to capture this beast? Could an animal even sever a head? And it seemed that a hybrid being part human, part werewolf was the obvious answer.
An invincible, supernatural being? A man who turns into a werewolf? As the old tale goes, a full moon can set off this frightening transformation. All of a sudden, fur grows all over his body, while the muscles grow beyond human proportions. Fingernails turn into sharp claws, hands become paws. The final result is a dreadful hybrid creature, half man, half wolf. The werewolf has an upright posture just like humans and attacks its victims with the force of a predator. Its bite can kill or infect the victims, who then carry their fate with them like a virus, eventually turning into creatures of the underworld under the light of the next full moon.
The werewolf is an ideal figure of horror, partly because it reminds us of our animalistic side and the fact that we are only a few steps from reverting to it. But also, they are the embodiment of evil. They drink your blood, and they are only killable with a silver weapon, and therefore they are the ultimate monster.
Werewolves, nothing more than a myth? Wisconsin, USA. According to woodman Steve Kruger, this is where the horror allegedly became reality. He was picking up roadkill on a November night in 2006.
They passed a deer on 164 that was not on the list, so I stopped to pick it up, and it was about an 80-pound doe.
But Steve is not the only one interested in the deer.
As I was doing the paperwork, the truck shook. Then it shook a lot harder the second time, and I looked up in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw whatever it was, the thing reaching into the bed of the truck.
Steve stares into the face of a dark, mysterious creature, a sight he hasn't been able to shake to this day.
To be honest, I just scared the living daylights on me. I just stepped on the gas. It frightened me. It just frightened me because it was something I was not expecting to see.
Steve immediately informs the local authorities. The case attracts media attention. They think they're dealing with an old suspect, the Beast of Bray Road. It's been seen in several places throughout Wisconsin since the 1930s. Judging by the description, it must be a werewolf. Our ideas about werewolves have mainly been based on horror movies. Werewolves have been appearing on the big screen since the 1940s. They're the stuff of nightmares, but also feed our fantasies, frightening and fascinating us at the same time. The belief that people can shapeshift into wolves is much older than Hollywood. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, a 4,000-year-old poem, a shepherd is transformed into a wolf. In about 700 BC, a man-turned-wolf is mentioned for the first time by the Greek poet Hesiod. Zeus is said to have punished King Lycaon by giving him a wolf's head. Roman author Titus Petronius adds the full moon as the trigger. But Nordic legends like Egil's saga also feature werewolves. The Germanic word ver or wer, signifying man, gives them their name, werewolves. Legends of the past are filled with a host of hybrids, like centaurs, minotaurs, or Pan. These characters are fictional, but to many people, they are real. By the early modern period, werewolves had also made their way into German folklore. Historian Utz Anhalt is looking for their traces in Lemgo, in the northwest of Germany. The former Hanseatic town was one of the hotspots for witch hunts back in the 17th century. The city archives hold some of the best preserved trial records. Utz Anhalt searches the house where the mayor used to live. He's looking for a link between werewolves and the witch hunt.
To the minds of the witch hunters, the transformation from human to wolf happened after a pact with the devil. That was one of the crimes in witch trials.
The witch hunt is based on a book, Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches. It was written by a Dominican monk, Heinrich Kramer. With the blessing of Pope Innocent VIII, he declares that witches, magicians, and werewolves exist. They live among us.
Vaudan, ihr seid der Zauberei angeklagt.
Driven by the church, the supposed allies of the devil are persecuted mercilessly. Up to 60,000 people fall victim to the witch hunts in Europe.
Long ago, witches, demons, and werewolves were very, very real, and it did seem like the obvious explanation.
Confessions were usually obtained under torture. These 400-year-old leg clamps also bear witness to this.
It has been designed to continuously increase the pain while the screws are tightened until the bones break eventually. And sooner or later, most of the victims were willing to confess anything their torturers wanted to hear just to make the pain stop.
Countless trial documents from the 16th and 17th centuries are stored in the basement of the city archive. They tell in great detail how the witch trials went down. A real treasure of information for Utz Anhalt. He's trying to get to the bottom of why these crimes were committed. One of the people on trial was David Wellman, a pharmacist.
This pharmacist was executed in 1669 for being a werewolf. He was charged with sorcery, murder by poisoning, and because he was said to have transformed into a wolf and to have flown from his pharmacy in Lemgo to his pharmacy in a town 10 kilometers from here.
The court records reveal crucial details. Wellman was affluent. He had debtors. The real motive for the indictment, envy. The murder charge, manufactured.
Dass ein Apotheker Kunden mit
Pharmacists might, of course, poison their customers and kill them. But looking at the trial records, it's obvious that he didn't commit any crimes. He was the innocent victim of rumors and denunciations, which cost him his life in the end.
Die ihn dann letztlich im wahrsten Sinne des Wortes den Kopf gekostet haben.
Accused of being a werewolf, Wellman doesn't have a chance. Stories like this spread like wildfire back in the day. Some could say they were the tinder that sparked the myth of the devious werewolf. Criers and leaflets helped turn the werewolf into the most popular, dreaded character of its time. Hypertrichosis, also called werewolf syndrome, is a rare genetic defect that can make people look like wolves. It causes an abnormal amount of body and facial hair growth. In the 18th century, people with the condition were exhibited at fairs like monsters.
Hypertrichosis is a very rare disease, and what's worse about it is that it cannot be hidden because it marks the face. So those who suffered from it would have known what it would have been like to be stared at and also to be taken advantage of, people trying to make money out of them. And what about those who witnessed it for the first time? Well, it would have been profoundly shocking, disturbing, and certainly very memorable indeed. And you can see why it could affirm people's pre-existing belief in werewolves.
250 years ago, the French become increasingly sure of one thing. The beast of Gévaudan is some sort of animal. All eyewitnesses agree on this. Louis XV therefore sends his best hunter, Francois Antoine, to the region. The personal friend of the king is meant to kill the beast and reinstate the king's good reputation. Antoine quickly determines there's no ferocious beast living in Gévaudan. It's just a wolf. After weeks of chasing the animal to no avail, he's finally successful. On the 18th of September, Antoine and his men kill a large wolf with several shots, despite the fact that the beast had never been seen in this area before. King Louis is content. He proudly presents the stuffed wolf at court. His message: the king has everything under control. The beast has been beaten. But the mysterious deaths in Gévaudan continue, and reports about the beast become increasingly creative. Ken Gerhard is a cryptozoologist. His field of research focuses on animals for whom little to no proof of their existence has been ascertained.
One of the things we look at in the field of cryptozoology is that people have seen an unusual looking or an extraordinary individual of a known species. But in the heat of the moment, with their emotions stirring, they often misinterpret what they're actually seeing and build it up into a monster or something remarkable, when in fact there is a totally pragmatic and logical explanation.
Eyewitnesses like Steve Kruger are key for Ken Gerhard's work. They meet up where Steve claims to have seen the werewolf.
Are you an outdoorsman?
Yep,
Have you hunted?
Yep. I've hunted my whole entire life.
Yeah.
But there's really no bear down here that I was even aware of.
Right. And so you saw, what, from here up?
No, I'd say more from the chest up.
That was the first thing that stood out to you, was the length of the muzzle?
And the big pointed ears.
And the ears were pointy, not rounded.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was on his hind legs. It just was something I've never seen before. It was leaning into the bed of the truck.
Gotcha.
And reaching for something.
Given the height of the bed of the truck and the position of the deer, the animal must have stood on its hind legs like a human being, with the head of a wolf. A werewolf? Ken Gerhard can also think of very natural explanations.
As a wildlife investigator, I also, it's my job to kind of weigh different possibilities and options and stuff. So I just want to show you one picture, and if you dispel it, that's totally fine because it's just part of the investigation process.
A bear with mange.
Yeah. So sometimes bears can have a condition like mange, which makes them look very unbear-like, as you can see.
Steve has enough experience to rule out a sick animal. It's the fantasy drawings that capture his attention.
This one, I mean, the ears were turned more forward.
Okay.
What did Steve really see?
We've eliminated bears, we've eliminated wolves, and we've even eliminated Bigfoot for people that might, advocate that. So the only thing left to consider is that it is one of these so-called dogman or werewolf-type creatures that many people have reported and described.
The case remains a mystery to this day.
Looking at this area, it's not that hard for me, honestly, to imagine that there could be, if something like this did exist, that it might not be lurking around in these woods, to this very day, so.
Time and again, amateur footage and pictures surface in the US, allegedly proving the existence of undiscovered creatures. They usually turn out to be fake. But the belief in Bigfoot remains widespread. And if the dreadful Mothman may exist, why can't werewolves too?
The United States was a country of pioneers and explorers from Europe who were experiencing a world the likes of which they had never seen before. Endless forests, mountains, and deserts. At the same time, they were meeting Native Americans who had their own mythology, and the myths of the Europeans and the Americans blended together. It's no wonder that this is a place of myth. This is where Sasquatch and Bigfoot and the Mothman come, and of course, werewolves.
A region particularly rich in werewolf sightings is southern USA. The swamps and rivers of Alabama make a safe retreat for all kinds of creatures. Doug Ward and his team have made it their mission to hunt these animals down. They are firmly convinced that the belief in werewolves is based on a real creature with flesh and blood.
The cryptid, if we find it, we're more interested in documenting than to, shoot down and barbecue the damn thing. We want to find out what it is, if it exists, and bring that back to the scientific world.
Doug documents all the reported sightings on his computer. Their most recent case took place at a river nearby.
Whatever it is out there in the woods is killing small animals, and I'd like to know what that is and kind of remove one of them from that situation.
When the men head out on their expeditions, they're prepared for the worst. Operating in the swamps is dangerous, not only because of the regular animals that live out there. Legend has it that the Alabama swamps are home to the rougarou, a monster with a man's body and a dog-like head, a werewolf. People often tell Doug Ward about the encounters they had with the rougarou, out in a lonely region covered by forests and swamps.
The reason we're here is the local sightings, recent local sightings, and the fact that this creek takes us all the way down to the Alabama River. The Alabama River takes us down into the swamps of South Alabama and ties into Mississippi, Louisiana, all over the path that this thing supposedly travels.
Doug meets his team member, Daniel Goggins. He lives near the river and is familiar with the story.
There's something out here, and it's been here since the Civil War. Or over that way is a place called Penitentiary Hill. That's where the Confederate soldiers used to hold the Yankees prisoners, but they collapsed it and blew it up because something was killing the prisoners.
Daniel also knows about the latest case.
Last weekend, actually, a couple was on a side-by-side out here, and they were the only one riding. It was about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and they saw something on 2 legs, hunched over, and ran across the creek and up into the woods. And they actually called the law because they didn't know what it was.
Ross is an expert when it comes to animal footprints. He searches the riverbed.
If anything's coming out here onto the water, it'll leave a print. You'll be able to see it. And it's barren, there's nothing on it. The wolf's not out here. You'd know it if he was.
The residents close to the river live in fear. Time and time again, skinned animals are found.
The local authorities think it's a person with a knife because it's so precision cut. The cuts are precise, the cuts are almost laser-like. It's very unusual. But the investigations usually eventually find it was some form of animal they can't identify.
An animal with particularly sharp claws, just like the one in France. Alabamians say the rougarou came from Europe, crossing the Atlantic in the 18th century as a stowaway on a ship. Does that mean the US swamps are haunted by the same creature that once instilled terror into the hearts of Vaudan residents? Back in France, Bernard Soulier is trying to find out more about the beast's origins.
The only predators in France at the time that could have attacked people were wolves. There were no other animals that would have done that.
Looking at exact data on the individual murders, Soulier wants to check if the patterns point to a wolf attack.
The very first victim of the beast was found here.
This map shows every deadly attack and the operational range of the beast. Some of the sites are 30 kilometers apart. No big deal for a wolf. Most of the attacks happened in and around the forest of Tenazere. Back in the 18th century, forests are perilous places, and wolves present a real threat.
Wolves are closely connected to the forest. It's an unknown realm, it's dark, it's frightening, and it's wild, and that's where the wolf is lurking.
Bernard Soulier wants to see for himself where the beast once launched its attacks. To this day, small paths run through the entire forest area.
The beast often attacked people on these paths, like the time they found a 16-year-old girl here in 1765. Her name was Agnès Mourk. The beast decapitated her. They found her dead body and her head, which had been severed from the rest of the body.
Son corps a été retrouvé, la tête séparée du corps.
These beheadings are what the expert finds most disturbing.
I think there's some resemblance between this animal and a wolf. But there's one major difference, and that's its aggressive behavior.
The beast is said to have killed at least 78 people and beheaded 16 of them. Does that sound like a wolf on a blood frenzy killing spree? Frank Fass runs the Wolf Center in northern Germany. He's heard the legends about murderous wolf creatures. Still, he enters their cages without any protection. How do the animals react?
Just a minute ago, they were both down here. And right now I'm seeing one of them, over there on that small ridge, walking in the opposite direction.
Frank Fass walks straight through their territory.
No, they're both over there, next to the fence. That means they walked around us in a semicircle instead of just walking past us.
The animals are clearly interested, but keep their distance. Frank Fass is able to walk around safely among them.
The wolves are not attacking us right away because they're always worried about their own safety. They're cautious animals. It's one of their main character traits.
While it's true these wolves live in captivity, their reaction is typical for their species.
Normally, wolves don't prey on humans. There have been, however, a few cases of wolf attacks, but they're really rare.
Rabies viruses are at the root of many of these attacks.
Rabies has different stages. One of them is called furious rabies. It doesn't last long, but these are the moments when a wolf might actually bite someone.
Animals infected with rabies lose all self-control, just like the legendary werewolf.
Rabies actually has two aspects that can be associated with werewolves. An animal suddenly and uncontrollably attacks, and it passes on the disease with a bite. So it's possible that this phenomenon did help spread the belief in werewolves. But at the same time, an infected animal does die shortly afterwards. So it doesn't really explain the entire myth.
But healthy wolves don't have a great reputation either. Cave paintings tell of the long and problematic history of men and wolves. They were after the same prey, and this led to conflict. The wolf is a clever hunter, revered in many cultures. Some groups of people even wear wolf skins, not just to keep themselves warm, no, they also hope to channel the predator's courage and strength. Wolves are often associated with traits like fierceness and aggression. Attacks on livestock and people are just the last piece of the puzzle. Tales and stories solidify the wolf's image. Once a villain, always a villain.
Wolves don't present a real threat to us today, but what we know about wolves is of course shaped by the stories we've heard. Every child knows about Red Riding Hood and the big bad wolf. That implies wolves are bad and we should be afraid of them.
What does this mean for the Vaudan case in France? A wolf that only kills women and children? Is that even possible?
I cannot imagine wolves that exclusively prey on human beings.
The beheadings don't make any sense to Frank Fass either.
I haven't heard of wolves taking the victim's head.
It's this detail in particular that shifts the focus to other animals, larger ones. Bernard Soulier is poring over contemporary depictions to find clues.
We've got a bunch of other depictions here. This book contains all the images of the beasts that exist. This one, for example, looks like a lion.
A lion could definitely be able to rip off a person's head, but most depictions point to something completely different.
This one shows the reddish fur of the beast, long red hair and a long bushy tail. These are the animal's characteristic features. Looking at this drawing, you might also be reminded of a hyena.
A hyena. The description of the fur matches this theory. Assuming a hyena managed to escape from a traveling circus back then, would it have been able to behead a person? To learn more, an experiment is conducted at the Institute for Bioengineering in Aachen. Researchers take the measurement of a large dog's skull. Based on the data, they build a model and a device with which they can adjust and fine-tune the occlusal force, the strength of its bite. The German Species Conservation Act only permits the use of dog skulls for such experiments. But as an engineer, Andreas Horbach knows how to simulate the bite characteristics of hyenas and wolves. The Copenhagen Zoological Museum has calculated the maximum bite force of wild animals. A wolf bites with up to 770 Newton. A hyena can manage roughly 1,000 Newton. For his test, the engineer uses a lamb's spine. It's comparable to a child's neck. Is the force strong enough to snap the spine? The monitor shows the force exerted by the dog's jaw.
We're continuously increasing the pressure and the force.
The pressure on the spine is rising. The force exceeds 700 Newton.
This is roughly the occlusal force of a wolf.
The spine can still withstand it. The machine keeps on increasing the force.
At about 1,000 Newton, we are at the bite force of a hyena.
The spine still isn't breaking. At 1,400 Newton, Andreas Horbach stops the experiment. The results are clear.
This experiment has made abundantly clear that 1.5 times the bite force of a hyena is still not enough to break a spine.
None of the animals that could have potentially gone on that rampage in Vaudan could have possibly bitten off a human's head. Something else must have caused that damage.
The occlusal force is not the determining factor for whether a wolf or a hyena can snap a spine. It rather comes down to how long they've worked on it, have moved it around, pulled on it, and how much time they've had.
Bernard Soulier thinks he knows why the hyena is a recurring theme in the depictions.
You have to know that back then every unknown animal, every wild animal people didn't immediately recognize was a hyena, because people didn't know as much about animals as we do today.
It remains unclear who or what the beast actually was. All 3 suspects would have been able to tear their victims to pieces, but not rip off their heads. This is why Doug Ward believes only a hybrid creature like a werewolf can be the likely perpetrator. The men are looking for any traces in a forest near the river.
This one's got a stride to it. It's got 2.5 foot stride to it. And that's odd. Unless it's a person jumping around out here making this track.
These men are actually experienced hunters. They'll know right away if this is true or not.
Look. That's what I'm saying. Look, it's claws.
Doug Ward decides to comb the area around the footprint with all technological means.
This place is a place of interest to us for our investigations. We found something out of the ordinary in a place that fits our criteria. So we're going to try to go through it and rule out all possibilities, see what we find.
Daniel Goggins examines the perimeter of the site.
It appears it came through this opening and went straight that way, whatever this was.
The men build a high-tech trap in the middle of the forest. They want to lure the beast in using sweet fragrances.
So what we've got set up right now is wireless infrared cameras, and we'll be able to monitor those and see what we see out here along the trail. We can see in the dark for probably about 25 foot. So from here to that game trail, we should get a clear view of whatever is going on.
The hunters are driven to get any form of proof they can, even though they know their endeavor is a long shot.
One of the reasons I think a lot of evidence has not been found out in the field is because this is like a lightning strike. Most people who run across something are not prepared to deal with it. We've done this for years and years and years, and us actually finding something that turns out to be not easily disprovable is rare.
The werewolf hunters are convinced that the rougarou really roams their forests and swamps, despite the fact that once again, they came up empty-handed. Doug Ward and his team won't stop looking for an explanation, not for the recent cases, nor for the old French legends. It seems quite impossible that the people in Vaudan were killed by a normal animal. How could it have managed to keep itself hidden from the best hunters of the time for so long? Why hasn't it ever attacked any men? And why were some of the victims naked? The only explanation left is that the series of murders starting with Jean Boulet happened at the hand of another beast. A human being.
Our modern explanation for what was going on back in the 1760s would be that a serial killer was operating, that there was a psychopath in the community. And certainly some of the explanations for what happened with the Gévaudan beast story is that it was a human.
Could a human be behind the werewolf legend? Relying on the Rougarou myth, Doug Ward and his fellows are trying to shed light on the issue on a cemetery in Selma, Alabama.
This spot here is different than most places in Alabama and most places on Earth. There are things that you just don't see everywhere and stories that you don't hear. The local legends here are based on a wide variety of older stories who came from all over the world.
People in Selma tell fabulous stories, scary stories.
A lot of times in their legends, there'd be a witch involved, a pact with the devil, transformation. It had a mystical side to it.
Doug Ward believes there is a rational explanation for these mystical tales.
The people didn't understand someone being dark and evil enough to murder and cannibalize large amounts of people. Today, we would know that as a serial killer. It's not that uncommon, even though it should be. But back then, they thought that that evil must come from the devil.
People believe that pure evil is behind the transformation from man to werewolf, the work of the devil. If you leave out Lucifer, there's just one perpetrator left in this story. A human being, a psychopath, a killer. Bedburg, near Cologne, Germany. The most famous serial killer to have also been convicted as a werewolf came from here. He is said to have committed heinous crimes back in 1589. Historian Utz Anhalt wants to know what's behind this case.
In diesem Waldgebiet soll Peter Stumpp, der bekannteste Werwolf.
Peter Stumpp, the most famous werewolf in history, is said to have committed his atrocious crimes in this forest. He confessed to killing 16 people, mainly children, and to eating them, hungry for their flesh. He also admitted to having killed and eaten livestock and to committing incest with his own daughter.
Back in his day, Peter Stumpp, or Stubbe, was seen as the personification of evil. Keeping a low profile, the farmer lives among the people who later fall victim to his evil urges. He comes under suspicion after a wolf ravages the region.
Peter Stumpp
was caught in a hunt. The men had wanted to catch a wolf that they thought had killed their cattle. Those who caught Stubbe in the end claimed they saw a wolf, and 1 moment later, Stubbe stepped out of the bushes.
Sie hätten einen Wolf gesehen und genau danach wäre dann aus dem Gebüsch gekommen.
A 16th century leaflet from London tells Stubbe's story. In the form of a wolf, he is said to have been chased and caught by a vigilante group. A popular alternative story makes the event seem even more horrible. In this version, the vigilantes were able to surround the wolf but couldn't catch it. One of the farmers cut off the beast's paw, who managed to escape badly injured. The wound Stubber suffered as an animal is said to have transferred to his human shape. The farmer is missing one of his hands. When he goes to town the next day, he is arrested. In prison, Stubber confesses all his crimes. He's sentenced to death. The leaflet describes the punishment at great length.
They broke his arms and legs so they could wind them into the spokes. They went on and tore pieces of flesh out of his body with red-hot pliers. They beheaded his mutilated body, and in the end, the entire body was burned.
Wurde dieser ganze Körper nochmal verbrannt.
Stubber goes down in history as a serial killer, but something doesn't add up about his confession.
The issue here is that this confession was coerced, and he also admitted under torture that the devil had given him a belt that allowed him to transform into a wolf. Looking at this, we can't just say, okay, let's take the parts that might have been real, and they are true, and the other parts that seem unrealistic aren't. There's actually no evidence that he ever killed anyone. They don't mention the victims' names. By today's rule of law standards, he should have never been tried before court.
Hätte überhaupt nicht erst vor Gericht kommen dürfen.
Stubber probably committed a whole other crime. The farmer was one of the first Protestants in a strictly Catholic region. In the eyes of the Catholic Church, he's the enemy and the target for their deadly denunciations. Executing him for being a werewolf might have been a symbolic act, a sign that there's only one true religion.
The church adopted stories of werewolves to try and keep people in line. So, as a man, if you misbehaved, if you made a pact with the devil, then you could become a werewolf. And this was the ultimate sanction to make sure that people stayed in line.
The case in Vaudan in France is different. The victims and their injuries are real. Is the same true for the beast? At the end, there's a hero. The mysterious animal is defeated by one of the locals. His name, Jean Chastel. The killer of the beast is still commemorated to this very day.
Jean Chastel was a villager, a farmer. There was nothing special about him, but he was an excellent hunter.
Hormis le fait qu'il était un réputé très bon chasseur.
In the early hours of June the 19th, 1767, Jean Chastel is in the woods near Auvers. He hears something at the outskirts of the forest. A large animal steps out of the thicket. Chastel immediately pulls the trigger. One single shot and it's done. The bullet pierces the animal's heart. And it quickly becomes clear, this was the beast.
After this animal was killed, there were no more attacks. And when Chastel killed the animal, people immediately said, okay, it's over. The beast has been shot. They didn't say a wolf had been shot. They recognized the animal.
A first report concludes that the beast was a dog-like animal. But there's no way of verifying this today. Jean Chastel wants a reward, and has the animal brought to the king's court. But the court has long closed the case. Louis XV orders that the half-rotten cadaver be buried on the premises of Versailles. The precise location remains unclear. So too does the role played by the story's hero, Jean Chastel. The hunter becomes suspicious. Maybe the beast really was a dog. A hound, to be exact.
The wolf hunters of the 18th century would catch young wolves and crossbreed them with hounds. They wanted to breed animals for greater endurance, more resilience, more strength. Such a hybrid might not fear people and could even readily attack them.
A hybrid would also explain why nobody has been able to identify the animal.
Perhaps this animal was man-made.
A hunter could have used the attacked dog as a weapon to kill. He could have undressed the dead bodies himself. He could have decapitated them. A hunter like Jean Chastel. There is no evidence, but at least there's one vital clue: the shot. A reconstruction reveals that Chastel was about 20 meters away from the animal. Far too great a distance to make a precise shot with a 17th century weapon. Except if the beast didn't move. Maybe because it was facing its owner. If that's true, the hunter would have sacrificed his animal to save himself. Regardless of whether Jean Chastel was a hero or a serial killer, the story definitely has its hand in perpetuating a belief in werewolves. Man and animal merging into a frightening hybrid, the werewolf. One of the myths of humanity passed on over thousands of years. Religious madness, disturbing diseases, and a primordial fear of wolves make our imagination run wild. An encounter with a werewolf? Unlikely. Maybe on the big screen. And only under a full moon.